I'd like to begin with Brexit, as a matter of fact, because it has been your job to prepare BlackRock for Brexit. And this is a job that you've undertaken for the past several months, in fact, probably more than a year. What if it doesn't happen?
I will be absolutely delighted. I don't care. It's an insurance policy. Everything we've done is to prepare for it to happen and for the worst to happen. But I'd be very happy if all of that was completely unnecessary.
Is that the likely outcome, given what's been going on in Parliament, that the UK doesn't, after all, end up leaving the EU?
You know, if I put my personal feelings aside, Eric, I think I would love the answer to that to be yes, but I don't think it is. I actually think we are heading for some kind of deal. I think the UK government obviously hasn't managed to get any movement on the backstop, which is the real issue. But I think we will inevitably have a delay, and they'll thrash out a deal. I don't think that any of the parties will really put their weight behind a second referendum, which is the only way we actually don't leave.
Let's say, hypothetically speaking, that is what happens, that there is a second referendum, and the UK doesn't end up leaving the EU.
Yep.
How long do you think it would take for the British economy and financial markets to recover from the process?
Well, that's a really good question. So if you think about what's the process done, well, it's slowed down everything that's happening in Britain that isn't to do with Brexit. So very few decisions on jobs, it's the Japanese pulling out, and so on and so on. So there's a lot of things that have happened. I do think it would take a couple of years at least. And the question will be really, will people trust us again as a country? Speaking as a British person. So will the Japanese still use Britain as a conduit to Europe? Will the Chinese, as they're coming into Europe, use Britain as a conduit? Or will they actually finally move into mainland Europe?
And your gut feeling on that would be?
They'll still use Britain.
They'll come back.
They'll come back. Or they won't leave in the way that they were currently planning to leave. Because, of course, the UK economy, the tax system's very favourable, the worker laws are favourable, and, of course, the English language makes it easier.
Now, while all this has been going on, financial markets in Europe have undergone what was supposed to be the biggest transformation in perhaps a generation, right? The implementation of MiFID II. We're now almost 15 months into the new regime. How would you evaluate the impact so far?
So a lot of the scrutiny at the beginning was around what does this do to trading, what does this do to sort of market structure. The scrutiny today is actually around what does this do to cost transparency, and how the part of it that deals with what distributors tell their end clients they're paying for their money to be managed. And that we haven't seen yet, because the statements that will hit investors, doormats or their email boxes that tell them actually what it costs to invest in all different kinds of products, that they haven't really been released yet. So we don't know how that part of it is going to hit. The part around research and trading actually has been relatively benign. People were very prepared for it.
Less than you and others had expected.
I think we, as an industry, we did a very good job in preparing, and then regulators across Europe have been very helpful in making sure that as we go through MiFID II reporting, the rules, which, as you probably know, are unbelievably complex.
Yes, many pages.
Yes, that actually how those get implemented. There's been sort of some forbearance to make sure that the industry, if there wasn't an agreed standard, they were given time to come up with whatever it is that needs to be done.
Does BlackRock have an idea yet as to what it would like to see changed about MiFID now that you've been in it for this long?
Oh, that's a good question. It's not necessarily what needs to change. It's more, is the customer side of the MiFID II regulations, is it going to be effectively regulated in the same way across all of Europe? Because, of course, every country regulates things slightly differently. They can all interpret regulations in a different way.
Well, that brings me to another question. What else could regulators do to make European financial markets more competitive?
Well, banking union, continuation of capital markets union, transaction taxes are not helpful, actually, and those are not EU-wide. They're typically individual countries. Anything that enables companies to raise capital more efficiently, and for investors to put their savings to work more efficiently. Pan-European pensions, which is something that's coming. That will be very important. Those kinds of things.
Rachel, it's International Women's Day tomorrow.
It is.
And I know that you have been deeply involved in BlackRock's efforts toward more diversity and inclusion. What about what's going on at BlackRock's, let's call it portfolio companies, the companies in which BlackRock invests? To what degree do you feel it's your responsibility or the firm's responsibility to apply pressure on those companies to take more action on diversity and inclusion?
So pressure is an interesting word. I think what you can do is encourage. And you can't create women that don't exist. And in certain countries, women simply aren't at a level in terms of their sort of professional experience to have a deeply penetrate senior levels of executive management, for example. In other countries, that's not true. In America, in Britain, actually, there's a lot more women at senior levels than maybe one would see. So you can't take a one-size-fits-all approach and say, well, pressure needs to be applied. What you can do is encourage. And you can encourage by sharing best practices. You can encourage by coming up with things like, we have an inclusion and diversity ETF, which we're very proud of. We think it's going to outperform the benchmark index that you would otherwise invest in. You can encourage people to do more. Larry's spoken a lot about the need for women on boards, women at executive levels. We're part of the 30% club. And so we're trying to use advocacy as opposed to pressure, because pressure won't necessarily work.
An issue that often gets lumped in with diversity and inclusion is sustainability.
Yep.
Fairly unfairly, but it happens. Sustainability is one of BlackRock's priorities in Europe. How real a business opportunity is that? How big is it here? How important is it relative to, say, what we see in the United States?
So you have to think of it in two ways. One is it an asset class, if you want to look at it that way?
Yes, that's a good question.
Right, and the other way of looking at it is what are the things that go into sustainability? They're things like environmental factors, social, governance, impact. You hear a lot of these different words used that all together kind of get bundled up with sustainability, including inclusion and diversity. You step back for a second and think, what is it that an asset manager does? We assess the risks in companies, and we make decisions on investing based upon those risks. How could you not assess the risks around, is a company sustainable? Does it have a social purpose? Does it have good governance practices? Does it pollute the environment? If you think of it in that way, then it's also about helping portfolio managers and investors to come up with better ways of assessing and being able to predict the sustainable value of a company. So you can't think of it just as a business. It's a new way of looking at, are companies likely to go up in value in the long term?
But that new way isn't being applied uniformly across the continent.
No, it's not. And just as the way that traditional stock pickers don't all pick the same stock, because that wouldn't make any sense. Right? Everyone has a different view. So you have to have research, you have to have data, you have to have the technology that enables you to extract data that hasn't been reported in a standardized way. And that's the interesting thing. It's the intersection of technology, let's call it, around asset management, and so data, the rise of data, machine learning, artificial intelligence that enables you to extract things from unstructured data sets so that you can then come up with better insights. So whether it's applied across Europe, that's not really the point. That's about regulatory standards aren't applied across Europe. But the fundamental principle of looking at what are the risk factors that will drive a company's performance, well, why wouldn't you do that?
Sounds to me like there's more to come from BlackRock on that front.
There's definitely more to come there.